Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. This time I'm delighted to welcome along Amy Bennie, who's the chair of Daisy Network. It's the only charity dedicated to providing medical and psychological support for women with premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI. After being diagnosed with the condition as a teenager, Amy's dedicated to helping those through the diagnosis and raising awareness of POI within the wider community. She's author of the book Daisy Network, Our Guide to Premature Ovarian Insufficiency, and works as a psychotherapeutic counsellor. Welcome along, Amy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So if you're happy to tell us about your own story and your own sort of journey to your diagnosis, how old were you when you were diagnosed with POI?
So the process, I suppose, started when I was about 15, when I still hadn't started my periods, and my mum thought that wasn't quite right. I've got an older sister who, she's 2 years older, but she started her periods quite young, at about 11. And I think my mum kind of assumed maybe I'd follow suit, or maybe I was a lot smaller than my sister, but maybe thought I'd be a couple of years later. But when I got to 15, she was like, I think something should be happening by now. And I was a very shy, awkward teenager, didn't want to talk about it. No, nothing, it's fine, it's fine.
It's too embarrassing, leave me alone.
Yeah, it's so embarrassing, don't want to talk about it. And she was like, no, I really think we should go to the doctors just to check. So went to the doctors at 15, and they said, yeah, I mean, maybe should have started by now, but you're quite small in height, you're quite slight. We'll give it another year, we'll wait till you're 16. You might just be sort of a slow developer. So that year passed, and I think my mum was kind of fingers crossed, hoping something was going to happen that year, and it didn't. So 16 came along, and again, I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming to the doctors, where they were like, yeah, something should have happened by now. We'll start doing some tests. So I had blood tests to check my estrogen levels and my FSH levels, and we then got a phone call to say, can you come in? And I think it was at that point we're like, oh, something's clearly not right, because you don't usually get a phone call telling you to come in if everything's okay. So yeah, I went in, and they basically said my brain was screaming at my ovaries to work. So FSH level was sky high, screaming at my ovaries to work, and they just weren't responding. So they said, yeah, your ovaries aren't functioning the way that they should be. At the time, I kind of sat there like, all right, okay, well, what does that mean?
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And my mum was crying, and I remember turning to her and saying, like, what are you crying for? Because I didn't really grasp the concept of it. I was just like, okay, my ovaries aren't working. Whatever.
Yeah, it'll kick in at some point.
Yeah. And mum said to the doctor sort of, well, can she have children? And the response was, not in the traditional way. And then they said, we'll refer you to an endocrinologist at the hospital. They'll explain things more. So that was kind of when I got the initial diagnosis. I wasn't really told what the condition was. I didn't really get told what it entailed. I was only told that my ovaries weren't working, that I couldn't have children in the traditional way, and that it was an extremely rare thing to happen. So that's kind of how I got the initial diagnosis, and then I was referred to an endocrinologist who then did sort of further investigations and kind of started me on a treatment plan.
So, and that was the point at which they sort of gave you the POI diagnosis, or?
No. So I was never actually given the terminology POI, or premature ovarian insufficiency. I was never told that phrase. I was never actually told what the condition was. It just that my ovaries weren't working, and that's kind of what I held for a lot of years, kind of I even remember Googling kind of ovaries don't work.
Defective ovary syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. All of these silly sort of phrases of trying to figure out, well, what is it? Like, how do my ovaries not work? What does that mean? And I couldn't find anything really because I was never given the actual phrase. It was only sort of through my own research, I mean, years later, where I found out the actual name of it. And for that period of time, like that, I was told it's such a rare thing to happen. It's really rare for a girl's ovaries to just not be functioning. And I thought I was literally the only person in the country with it because I didn't have the name of it. I didn't know anything about it other than it's really rare. So I went for quite a lot of years not really understanding what was going on and thinking I was the only person that this had happened to.
How common is it for it to happen to somebody that young as you were?
So it's quite rare for it to happen sort of before you even start your periods, so kind of pre-puberty, I suppose. The statistic is like 1 in 100,000, which is very rare, but also not that rare if you think of the amount of people in the country. 1 in 100,000, that's a fair few amount of people. Yeah, so I think when I found that out, it was quite comforting to know that I'm actually definitely not the only person in the country that this has happened to.
And so how did you find Daisy Network? Was that already in existence and you found them, or?
Yeah, so I didn't find them until I was in my early 20s. So I'd had the condition for about 5 years when I found them. And that was again just through my own research. I think for a lot of years I kind of buried my head in the sand. I had exams to do. I was kind of like, I'll deal with this later. I was given the contraceptive pill as my treatment to kind of just start some periods. So yeah, for a lot of years, I just buried my head in the sand, kind of ignored it, pretended it wasn't happening. And I think it was when I got to my early 20s, I was kind of like, I'm ready to find a little bit more about this. And I just did a lot of Google searches. And at the time, Daisy Network was a forum online, and I found this forum of lots of other women and girls talking about it and having conversations about it, and I was like, this is what I've got. This is it. So I have to say, at 21, when I originally found the Daisy Network, I read that forum and I was kind of like, okay, I know what I've got now. And I kind of parked that to the side and didn't really do anything about it. I just felt like that was okay now. I knew I wasn't the only person, and that was okay, that I knew there was other people out there, but I wasn't still quite ready to engage with it. So again, a couple of years later, I kind of returned to the Daisy Network site and started to engage with it more and realise, actually, if I'd known this had existed from 16, I wouldn't have had those years of burying my head in the sand, and I suffered with a lot of anxiety to the point I couldn't go out the house at one point. I got sort of agoraphobia so bad because of the panic attacks, which I think were a combination of hormonal because of the low estrogen, sort of a menopausal symptom, but also a psychological impact of kind of just burying this diagnosis somewhere in a box
thing
and not dealing with it. So yeah, I had this crippling anxiety, and I wondered kind of if I'd been given this space at 16 at diagnosis, things might have been so different for those 5-6 years where I felt really alone, didn't know what was going on, thought I was the only person in the country. Yeah, so I think that's when I kind of realised the importance of, God, yeah, there is other people out there with this, and I feel so much better now I know that there's other people out there. So that's when I sort of started to engage with the Daisy Network community at first.
And there's a huge amount of information, resources on the website. So it's daisynetwork.org if anyone's interested in having a look or wants to pass that information on. And it's entirely volunteer led. What's your involvement now with the charity?
So again, when I started to engage with the community, I think I was probably about 23, 24. And I kind of just dropped them a message and said, because I realised it was entirely volunteer run, and I thought, is there anything I can kind of do to help? And at the time, they didn't have any social media. So I sort of set up all of their social media accounts and started sort of an Instagram and a Facebook and Twitter page and that sort of thing. So I did that for a couple of years, just in the background, and kind of got involved with their team meetings, and I absolutely just loved having this group of people that were all kind of as passionate as me of raising awareness, because the entire volunteer team are made up of either women with POI or medical team that work with women with POI, so kind of run POI clinics and things like that. So that's how I originally started, and then I suppose my role just kind of expanded, where I then started to do kind of answer press emails and that sort of thing. And then when the chairs that were kind of running it at that time decided it was time for them to step down, I was then voted in as the chair of the charity. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years, I think now. So as chair, I kind of oversee the charity as a whole, the direction that it's going in, support the kind of volunteer team, and kind of just oversee it. And I think what's really good is that as somebody that started as a member of the charity, as somebody that used the service, I can then kind of
you've got that empathy of with people coming to it for the first time.
Absolutely. And I know what it's like to be them, and also I know what I would have loved at that time. So that's how we've kind of been implementing it, is actually when people first find us, what support are they needing? And that's what we now provide. So entire volunteer run, we do it just all in our spare time, just as sort of a passion project, really.
And I guess what somebody, the age that you were, sort of 15, 16, what they might need would be quite different to somebody who was getting this diagnosis at, say, 25, 26.
Yeah, that's it. So what I kind of see the term POI, or premature ovarian insufficiency, as is kind of like an umbrella term for various different ways that you can get this diagnosis. So people get this diagnosis sort of like that as a teen before they've even started their periods. There's people that get it in their 20s. There's people that get it when they're trying for a baby and realise this isn't successful, so what's happening? Then they get this diagnosis. There's people that go through premature menopause or POI, for example, going through surgery, say they've had polycystic ovary syndrome, or they've gone through cancer treatment, and chemotherapy and radiotherapy can put you into menopause. So we have a network of women, but everybody's story is different. So we kind of use POI as the umbrella term, because everybody, no matter what route they've found the diagnosis, they've still got the same thing at the end of the day, which is the premature menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency. But each route comes with its own challenges and its own, I suppose, dynamics. Everybody has a different story. So, for example, somebody like myself who was diagnosed really young, I didn't really get those typical menopausal symptoms. So I didn't get the hot flushes. I didn't get the mood swings, because my estrogen wasn't ever high enough to drop.
Right, I see.
So younger people tend not to get those symptoms, whereas somebody, say, in their 30s, they might come to the diagnosis because they're really feeling unwell, they're getting the hot flushes, they're feeling really poorly, they're getting so tired, they can't concentrate. And that's how they might get to the diagnosis.
And they definitely at that age wouldn't be expecting all of that to be menopause, perimenopause.
Absolutely. And that's what we find. A lot of people really struggle to get the diagnosis, especially when they're in that category of the 20s, 30s, early 40s even, because you go to the doctors with mood swings or fatigue or irregular periods, and they're just like, that's life, that's stress.
Could be anything.
That's a normal 20-year-old who's got a million things going on. So it takes a long time to actually get to the point of getting those blood tests to check for premature menopause, because it's not the first thing on people's heads when a 20-year-old walks into the doctors with these symptoms.
And looking at your website earlier, I think it says something like 90% of the time there's no sort of explainable cause, obvious cause for this happening.
Yeah, that's it. And usually once you've had the blood test that gives you this diagnosis, you'll then be given more blood tests to check for various autoimmune conditions. So Fragile X is one of them, Turner syndrome is one of them, Hashimoto's is another one. But most women with the condition, like you said, 90%, there is no known cause. And that's part of the frustration of it, is that it just happens spontaneously. It happens for no reason whatsoever. I mean, they're looking now into there's a big study going on just to check the genomes of women with POI to see if there's anything that maybe they can pick up that is in the women's genomes, or is it something to do with they were never born with the same amount of egg reserve as other women, so it runs out quicker. There's all of these studies going on, but nobody knows why.
So we may know more, hopefully, in a few more years. We may
know more in the future, exactly, hopefully, but right now, the majority of people that get those tests to find a cause don't get one. And that's quite difficult for some people to accept, I suppose, because like, I've been perfectly healthy. I've had nothing wrong with me. Why me? Exactly.
And am I right in saying that obviously for those of us who kind of come to menopause at inverted commas normal age, HRT is perhaps slightly different consideration, but for somebody going through early menopause, it's really important that they get this sort of additional protection of estrogen to avoid things like osteoporosis. So you talked about being on contraceptive sort of hormones earlier in life. Are you now taking something that is more like HRT?
Yeah, so HRT is vital when you've got POI, because really what we need to do is give us the same hormone levels as everybody else our age. So if you're 30, you should be having the same hormone levels as every other 30-year-old woman. And the way to do that is through HRT. So a lot of girls, especially when they're younger, they are given the contraceptive pill at first. And that's just kind of as a way to give you some estrogen until kind of things settle down a bit, symptom management, and then it goes into the more tailored approach, which is HRT. So we'll be on HRT, the same type of HRT that anybody's on in normal menopause. But what we do find is women with POI need a much higher dose. So, for example, if somebody over 50s went on HRT, they'd usually probably be given 2 milligram of estrogen. I'm on 8 milligrams of estrogen. So I take sort of 2 milligram tablet, an additional 2 milligram tablet, a 2 milligram patch. So we have to have a lot higher dosage to get our levels at the right place.
And you'd presumably expect to keep taking that until sort of average age of menopause, and then
absolutely,
sort of
because we need to have the right amount of estrogen, otherwise bone health, heart health, brain health will suffer. And obviously that's a long time to be without estrogen if you went through it in your 20s. You know, that's however many years of lack of estrogen. And we know the consequences of low estrogen in women over 50. So imagine another extra 30 years of no estrogen. So yes, we can stay on HRT until the natural age of menopause, or longer if we want. Something that is important to note with POI as well, obviously I know there's so much discussion and scaremongering, dare I say, about HRT in terms of the risks and that sort of thing. When you have premature menopause, those risks don't exist, because what you're doing is taking your estrogen up to the normal level of where it should be. So you're not overfilling it, you're taking it to exactly where it should be. So you're not kind of adding in additional hormones, you're actually just adding in the right amount of hormones that you should have had anyway.
And so if anyone's listening to this and, either perhaps their own child they think might be going through this, or someone in their family, or even themselves, what would you suggest is their sort of plan of action to get diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think if you have a child or a sister or someone, a friend's daughter that that hasn't started their periods by 15, that's your first point of call to take them to the doctors and ask for an estrogen and FSH test. Similarly, if you are over 20 and you start getting these symptoms of hot flushes or anxiety, depression, mood swings, what you might Google as and see it's typical menopausal symptoms, first point of contact is to go to your GP and ask for those blood tests. Ask for an FSH test and an estrogen test. And from there, you'll be able to gauge actually whether you are going through POI, or even if you're in the very early stages of it. Sometimes if you're just getting these symptoms, if you go as soon as possible to the doctors, sometimes you can't prevent it, but you can do things to kind of, whether it's freezing your eggs or starting your family early, just so that you don't get to the point of where your eggs have all depleted. You can kind of catch it in the earlier stages. So it's just really important that you go to the doctors and advocate for yourself to get those blood tests. But like I say, if you have any suspicions at all, you can go to our website, daisynetwork.org, and have a look at the list of symptoms and see if they ring true, and even, ask any of our members in our little community whether you think that it's something you could have, and we can offer help and advice and direction. But yeah.
And if someone's having, let's say that, they feel like they're not really getting anywhere with the sort of medical professionals, you can offer sort of support and advice to help them advocate for themselves.
Yeah, so we have a medical team within Daisy Network who are there to offer any medical advice, give you direction of what to do, what to request. We have a list of specialist clinics that you can get referred to. We also offer psychological advice if you've had the diagnosis or you're getting the diagnosis, in terms of actually how to deal with this. So
I imagine that's a huge thing as well, because it's not just the physical fallout, but dealing, as you say, with all of that trauma, really, of being, especially if you want to have a family and you're suddenly, that's off the table.
That's it. So I think a lot of it is, I feel like there's a two-pronged approach to it. The first one is the medical side, which is getting your HRT and getting your hormone levels where they need to be. But the other is that psychological side, because it's a very strange place in life to be, because you don't fit in with your peers because they're on about fertility and contraception. And you're getting told you're in the menopausal category, but then you also don't fit in with that either, because you're like, well, I'm 20, I don't fit in the same category as, say, my mum. So it's a very strange limbo state to be in, and psychologically it's hard to understand that. So I think that's where the community really is helpful, because they're your people who understand what it's like.
They've been through it all. Is that why you decided to train as a psychotherapeutic counsellor?
Yeah, it is. I think because I ended up going privately for therapy, and it was a life-changing sort of experience for me. And I think a lot of people don't have the privilege of being able to either pay for their therapy, or their NHS only provide 1 or 2 sessions sometimes, or none at all. So actually, I really wanted to train to then be able to offer the service to people who wouldn't be able to access it privately. And just because I found the benefit of it, I knew that it's so important for women with POI to be able to get that service.
And is that the area that you specialise in, or do you work? Okay.
Yeah, I work at the places too, but my specialist interest is in women with POI or menopause, yeah.
And do you, I don't know, you've had a long time, obviously, to kind of come to terms with this and reconcile what has happened. Are you at peace with that now? Do you still sometimes feel that kind of pang of what could have been?
Yeah, I feel like I am at peace with it, because it's 16 years now since I've had the diagnosis. So I was diagnosed at 16 and I've had the diagnosis for 16 years. So it's half of my life. And that half of my life, I feel like I've invested so much time and energy into coming to terms with the diagnosis that I'm at peace with it. And I wouldn't know my life without it. So I feel like it is part of me, and I don't know who I would be without it. It's not saying that sometimes I still don't get annoyed that I've got it, because I'm still trying to deal with my medication, or my prescription's not in and I feel like I need to change my prescription because it's not working anymore, or I start getting allergic to my patches, so I've got to change them. Or then there's still those things of, the occasional trigger when, say, your friend gets pregnant and talks about it, how, we only tried once and we got pregnant straight away, and it's like, that's amazing, and I can be happy for them, but then there's also still that part of like, that's never going to be as easy for me. So it's not to say that it's totally plain sailing and I'm happy about it, but I've come to an acceptance where actually I've got the resilience to deal with those things that come along now.
Yeah, and I imagine training as a therapist probably helps quite a lot with that side of thing.
Absolutely. I've had to go through a lot of my own therapy beforehand, and then when training as a therapist, you've got to have so many hours of your own therapy as well. So I've took a lot of self-discovery to get to the place that I am now. Yeah.
Well, even if we reach one Amy through this episode who finds the Daisy Network when they really need it, then it's worthwhile. So I'm incredibly grateful both for the work that you and all your volunteer colleagues do, and for your time today. So thank you very much for sharing your story. And there's a huge amount of information on the website. As we've said, I'll pop the link in the show notes as well. It's an incredible resource. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's great to have a platform to talk about it to a new audience, so thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live, and why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.